The city exhaled a shimmering breath of twilight, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and molten gold. Below, on the rain-slicked asphalt of a street lined with hushed, expensive buildings, a car that looked more like a polished obsidian weapon than a mode of transport hissed to a stop. It was a Koenigsegg, a machine of such obscene power and price that it seemed to suck the very humility out of the air around it. The driver's door scissored open, and Arthur Vance emerged. He wasn't a man who walked. He was a man who arrived. Dressed in a suit so sharp it could have been tailored from shards of glass, his every movement was an announcement of his own importance. His watch, a Patek Philippe, caught the last rays of sun, scattering them like cheap confetti. He tossed the keys to a wide-eyed valet without a word, a gesture of casual, thoughtless dismissal that was more insulting than any curse. He was a man who had clawed his way from obscurity to a nine-figure net worth, and he wore his success like a suit of armor, believing it made him invincible, infallible. Tonight, that armor gleamed under the soft lights of the Gilded Quill, a restaurant so exclusive that its reservation list was a litany of the city's most powerful names. On his arm was Chloe, a woman 20 years his junior, whose beauty was as striking as his wealth. But where Arthur's eyes were hard and predatory, Chloe's were soft, carrying a hint of nervous energy, as if she were perpetually bracing for an impact. She was a student of art history, drawn to Arthur's world of power but increasingly uncomfortable with the man at its center. As they were led to their table, a prime spot by the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city's glittering sprawl, Arthur's gaze swept the room with an air of proprietary judgment. He was not here to enjoy a meal. He was here to conquer it, to make the space his own through sheer force of will. The maître d', a man with a practiced, seamless smile, pulled out Chloe's chair. Arthur waved him away and did it himself, a performative act of chivalry that was more about control than courtesy. "The best table, of course," Arthur said, his voice a low rumble that carried an implicit threat. "I trust everything will be satisfactory." "Of course, Mr. Vance. Everything will be perfect," the maître d' assured him before melting back into the opulent shadows of the restaurant. The ambience was one of restrained elegance. The clink of silverware was muted, the conversations a low, melodic hum. It was a sanctuary of quiet luxury, a world away from the noise and struggle of the city below. Into this sanctuary Arthur Vance was about to detonate. A waiter approached their table. He was an older black man, perhaps in his late 50s, with the posture of immense dignity. His uniform was immaculate, his movements fluid and economical, born of years of practice service. A silver name tag on his jacket read Samuel. His eyes, however, were what one noticed most. They were calm, intelligent, and held a depth that seemed to absorb the light around them, giving nothing away. He placed 2 leather-bound menus on the table with a quiet grace. "Good evening. My name is Samuel, and I will be taking care of you tonight. May I begin with some water for the table? We have a sparkling San Pellegrino or our own house-filtered still water." Arthur didn't even look at him. He was busy scrolling through something on his phone, his thumb moving with aggressive speed. "Whatever," he muttered, not lifting his head. Chloe, however, offered a warm smile. "The still water would be lovely, thank you, Samuel." Samuel gave a slight, respectful nod. "Of course, madam." He moved to pour the water, his actions precise and unhurried. As the crystal-clear water filled their glasses, Arthur finally looked up, his gaze fixing on Samuel with an unnerving intensity. It was the look of a scientist studying an insect, a look devoid of human connection. "Let's have the 82p truss," Arthur commanded, snapping the menu shut. It was one of the most expensive wines on the list, a bottle that cost more than most people's monthly rent. It was a statement, a bludgeon. Samuel's expression didn't flicker. "An excellent choice, sir. A truly remarkable vintage." He paused for a fraction of a second. "May I ask if you'll be decanting?" Arthur sneered, a small, ugly twist of his lips. "Do I look like a man who drinks wine straight from the bottle? Of course, you'll decant it. And don't take all night." He waved a dismissive hand, already turning his attention back to Chloe, as if Samuel had ceased to exist. Chloe's cheeks flushed with a faint pink. "Arthur, please," she whispered, a plea in her eyes. "What?" he said, feigning innocence. "I'm just making sure we get what we're paying for. This is what these people are here for." "Service." He said the word service as if it were something distasteful, something found on the bottom of a shoe. Samuel returned a few minutes later with the bottle of wine, presenting it to Arthur, with the reverence of a museum curator handling a priceless artifact. Arthur glanced at the label, gave a curt nod, and then watched with hawk-like eyes as Samuel performed the ritual of opening and decanting the wine. Every movement was flawless, from the clean cut of the foil to the gentle pour that allowed the wine to breathe. There was no flaw to be found, a fact that seemed to annoy Arthur more than anything else. He took a sip from his glass, swirled it dramatically, and held it to his nose. "It's adequate," he pronounced, setting the glass down with a thud that was just a little too loud for the hushed room. For the next hour, this became the pattern. Arthur's behavior was a masterclass in subtle, and not so subtle cruelty. He found fault with everything. The bread was not warm enough. The butter was too cold. He beckoned Samuel to the table not with a glance or a quiet word, but with a sharp, commanding snap of his fingers, a sound that sliced through the restaurant's serene atmosphere and caused heads to turn. Each time, Samuel would appear, his face a mask of professional calm, his voice even. "Yes, sir." "This amuse-bouche," Arthur said, pointing a gold signet ring at the tiny, exquisite morsel on the plate. "The chef is getting lazy. The foam is collapsing." "Take it back." The foam was, in fact, perfect. Chloe had just remarked on how light and flavorful it was. Samuel simply nodded. "My apologies, sir. I will inform the chef." He removed the plate without a word of protest. Chloe couldn't bear it. "Arthur, it was delicious." "Why would you do that?" "Because I can," Arthur replied, a chillingly simple explanation. "Because for $2,000 a meal expect perfection. And because I want to see how far he'll bend before he breaks." He looked over at Samuel, who was speaking quietly to the maitre d', his posture still unbowed. "They're all the same. They smile and scrape and say, 'Yes, sir,' because they want a big tip. It's a pathetic little dance." The main courses arrived. Arthur had ordered the A5 Wagyu, a cut of beef so marbled and tender it was legendary. Samuel placed the plate before him. It was a work of art, the steak seared to a perfect crust, resting on a bed of truffle-infused puree. Arthur picked up his knife and fork, cut a small piece, and chewed it with exaggerated deliberation. He swallowed, then laid his utensils down. With a metallic clatter, he leaned back in his chair, a smug look on his face. He snapped his fingers again. Snap. The sound was sharp, ugly. Samuel was at his side instantly. "Is there a problem with the steak, sir?" "A problem?" Arthur chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "You could say that. It's overcooked. I asked for medium rare. This is medium, at best. It's ruined." Chloe stared at the piece of steak on his plate. It was a flawless, ruby-red medium rare. The lie was so blatant, so audacious, that it stole the air from her lungs. "Arthur, no, it's not," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It looks perfect." Arthur shot her a look of pure venom, a silent command to be quiet. He turned his cold eyes back to Samuel. "Are you going to stand there and argue with the customer? Or are you going to fix this?" This was the moment. The breaking point Arthur had been trying to engineer all night. He expected anger, frustration, a crack in the perfect facade. He wanted to see Samuel flustered, to see him grovel, but Samuel did none of those things. He looked from Arthur's face to the steak on the plate. His gaze was steady, unreadable. For the first time, a flicker of something other than placid professionalism crossed his features. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment, as if he had been hoping for something more from Arthur, and had been let down. "You are correct, sir," Samuel said, his voice as smooth as polished wood. "It is unacceptable. Please, allow me to have the kitchen prepare another one for you immediately. My sincerest apologies." He took the plate. The reverse humiliation was so complete, so disarming, that Arthur was left momentarily speechless. Samuel had refused to play the game. By agreeing so readily, by taking the blame for a non-existent error, he had stripped Arthur of his power. The bully had thrown a punch and hit nothing but air. Arthur's face tightened, his jaw clenching. He had not broken the waiter. The waiter had, in his own quiet way, broken him. The rest of the meal passed in a tense, suffocating silence. The new steak arrived, identical to the first, and Arthur ate it without a word of complaint, sullen and brooding. Chloe picked at her food, the magic of the evening utterly shattered. She looked at the man across from her, a man she thought was powerful, and for the first time, she saw him as he truly was, small, petty, and deeply insecure. His wealth was not a source of strength, but a shield for his own profound weakness. Finally, the ordeal was over. Samuel cleared the last of the plates. Will there be anything else? Dessert? Coffee? Just the check. Arthur snarled. Very good, sir. Samuel returned a moment later with the small, black leather folder. He placed it discreetly on the table and retreated. Arthur snatched it up. He glanced at the total and astronomical sum, and a cruel smile returned to his face. This was his final move, his checkmate. He pulled out a pen, a ridiculously ostentatious Mont Blanc, and drew a thick, angry line through the section for the tip. Then, next to the line, he wrote in large, block letters, 0, and below that, he added an underline and a single, contemptuous word, service. He snapped the folder shut and placed his credit card on top. An American Express Centurion, the mythical black card, made of anodized titanium. He pushed it to the edge of the table, a final, arrogant flourish. He had made his point. He had won. Samuel returned to the table and picked up the folder without looking inside. His expression was as placid as ever. Thank you, sir. I'll be right back. Arthur leaned back, a triumphant smirk on his face. He looked at Chloe, expecting admiration. Instead, he saw a look of quiet disgust. What's wrong with you? He asked. He was nothing but professional and kind to us all evening, despite how you treated him, she said, her voice barely a whisper. That was a cruel thing to do, Arthur. A truly cruel thing. It's not cruel, it's business, Arthur retorted. You get what you deserve. He provided terrible service, and he gets paid accordingly. It's that simple. He needs to learn his place. They sat in silence, waiting. The wait stretched on. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5. Arthur's triumphant smirk began to fade, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. Other tables that had finished after them were already leaving. What was taking so long? He was Arthur Vance. People didn't keep him waiting. Finally, he saw Samuel approaching their table. But he wasn't alone. He was walking with the maitre d' from earlier, and Samuel was no longer carrying the bill folder. His hands were empty. He stopped at their table, and for the first time all evening, the mask of the professional waiter was gone. In its place was an expression of calm, unassailable authority. It was Samuel who spoke, not the maitre d'. Mr. Vance, he said, and his voice was different now. It had a new weight, a new resonance. It was the voice of a man in charge. There appears to be a problem with your card. Arthur stared at him, dumbfounded. What? That's impossible. There's no limit on that card. Run it again. We have, sir, Samuel said calmly. We've run it 3 times. The transaction has been declined. He placed the black card on the table. It looked dull and lifeless now. Hot, prickling. Wave of shame and anger washed over Arthur. Declined? Him? He was fumbling in his wallet, his hands suddenly clumsy. Fine, fine. It must be a system error. Here. He slapped down another card, a platinum visa. Try this one. Samuel did not take the card. He simply looked at the maitre d'. Jean-Pierre, would you? The maitre d' took the card and walked away. The silence at the table was deafening. Chloe was staring at her hands, mortified. Other diners were beginning to cast curious glances their way. Arthur could feel their eyes on him, his face burning with humiliation. He, Arthur Vance, was being treated like a common deadbeat. A minute later, Jean-Pierre was back, his face grim. He spoke to Samuel in a low voice, then placed the second card back on the table. That one has also been declined, Mr. Vance. Samuel announced, his voice steady, as has the Amex Platinum from your corporate account, which we took the liberty of trying as well. Arthur's blood ran cold. This wasn't a system error. This was targeted. Impossible. Who had that kind of power? He felt a sudden, dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the floor had fallen away from beneath him. His entire identity, his entire sense of self, was built on the foundation of his limitless wealth. And in the space of 5 minutes, that foundation had turned to sand. What is going on? He stammered, his voice a pathetic croak. Samuel pulled out the chair opposite Arthur and sat down. The act was so unexpected, so completely contrary to the established order of things, that it shocked Arthur into silence. A waiter did not sit at a customer's table, but Samuel was no longer a waiter. He was something else entirely. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the leather billfolder. He opened it and pushed it across the table toward Arthur. But it wasn't the bill from the restaurant. The original receipt was gone. In its place was a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper. It was a legal document, a letter of intent. Arthur stared at it, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. At the top was the letterhead of a company he knew all too well, Carter & Sons Manufacturing. For the past 6 months, Arthur's venture capital firm had been engaged in a ruthless hostile takeover of Carter & Sons, a family-owned, legacy manufacturing business. He had been squeezing them, bleeding them dry, using every dirty trick in the book to force them to sell for pennies on the dollar. The company's founder, David Carter, an old man in his late 70s, had refused to buckle, fighting with a dignity that Arthur had found infuriating. Arthur's eyes shot up from the paper to the man sitting across from him. He looked at the calm, wise eyes, the dignified posture. He looked at the name tag he hadn't even bothered to read properly earlier. Samuel, my full name, the man said, as if reading his mind, is Samuel Carter. David Carter is my father. The world stopped. The hushed sounds of the restaurant faded into a dull roar in Arthur's ears. The waiter, the man he had spent the entire evening tormenting, humiliating, and demeaning, the man to whom he had refused a tip because his service was inadequate. This man was the son of his current business adversary. You're. Arthur couldn't form the words. I am, Samuel said. For the past 30 years, I built a career in finance, a quiet one. I prefer to stay out of the limelight. I manage my family's portfolio, our private foundation, and a few other quiet investments. One of those investments, as of last week, is a majority stake in the international bank that holds all of your corporate and personal lines of credit, the very lines of credit that were just frozen, pending a review of what seems to be some rather aggressive and potentially unethical business practices. Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. He was looking at a ghost. He had spent months trying to destroy David Carter, seeing him as a feeble old man, an obstacle. He never once considered that the old man had a son who was, it was now terrifyingly clear, a financial predator far more sophisticated and powerful than Arthur could ever hope to be. Why? Arthur whispered. Why this? Why work here as a waiter? Samuel leaned forward, and for the first time, his voice held a sharp edge of cold fury. Because when a man like you tries to destroy my father's life's work, a company he built with his bare hands, a company that has provided for thousands of families over 50 years. When you refer to my father in your internal memos as dead wood that needs to be cleared out, I wanted to understand what kind of man you were. I didn't want to read reports from my investigators. I wanted to see you for myself. I wanted to look you in the eye. I wanted to serve you a meal and see if there was a shred of decency in your soul. He paused, and his gaze was heavy with the weight of his judgment. I have my answer. Chloe finally stood up, her face pale. She looked at Arthur, her eyes filled not with anger, but with a profound and sorrowful pity. I think I'm going to go, she said softly. She didn't look back as she walked away, disappearing out of Arthur's life as quietly as she had entered it. He barely noticed. Arthur sat there, stripped bare. His money was gone. His date was gone. His pride was a heap of smoldering ash. All that was left was the man he had been taunting all night. now sitting in judgment of him. "So what now?" Arthur asked, his voice hollow. "You're going to ruin me?" "I could," Samuel said, his voice returning to its calm, even tone. "I could break you so completely that you would never work in the city again. I could do to you exactly what you planned to do to my father. It would be just." He let the word hang in the air. Then he pushed the document on the table a little closer to Arthur. "But my father didn't raise me to be a man like you, Mr. Vance. He raised me to build things, not to tear them down." He tapped the paper. "This is a new offer. It's not your hostile takeover. It's a merger, a partnership. Your firm provides the capital for a much-needed modernization of the Carter and Sons factories. In return, you get a minority stake, a fair one. It will save my father's company, and it will be a very profitable and honorable investment for you. It might even save you from bankruptcy." Arthur stared at the paper. It was a lifeline, a path to salvation offered by the very man he had tried to crush, both in the boardroom and in this dining room. "The receipt for your meal tonight is on the house, Mr. Vance," Samuel continued, standing up. "Consider it a professional courtesy. But this," he said, gesturing to the contract, "this is the real bill. This is the price of your character. You have until morning to sign it. My father is waiting for your call. I hope, for your sake, you make the right one." Samuel turned and walked away, not back to the kitchen, but toward the front of the restaurant, where the maitre d' held his coat for him. He nodded to the staff, not as a co-worker, but as their employer. It was then that Arthur finally understood. The Gilded Quill. It wasn't just a place Samuel worked. It was a place he owned. The entire evening, from the moment he had walked in, he had been a guest in Samuel Carter's world. He had just been too arrogant to see it, left alone at the table, a ruined man, in a temple of his own humiliation. Arthur Vance looked down at the contract. He saw the elegant signature line waiting for him. He picked up his expensive Mont Blanc pen, the one he had used to write zero with such vicious glee. The pen felt heavy now, burdened by the weight of his own cruelty. He looked at his reflection in the polished, dark wood of the table. He didn't see a millionaire. He saw a fool, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt something other than pride or anger. He felt shame. With a trembling hand, he signed the contract, his signature a messy, flawed testament to his own defeat and to the beginning of his redemption. The story of Arthur Vance and Samuel Carter is more than a tale of a rich man and a waiter. It is a profound lesson etched in the heart of our shared humanity. It reminds us that a person's true worth is not measured by the numbers in their bank account, but by the content of their character. True power is not the ability to command and belittle, but the strength to show grace and integrity in the face of disrespect. Arthur Vance thought his wealth made him a king, but his cruelty revealed he was a pauper of the soul. Samuel Carter, cloaked in the humble uniform of a waiter, showed that true authority comes from dignity, wisdom, and a deep understanding that the greatest victory is not in crushing an enemy, but in offering them a path to become better. In a world that often mistakes arrogance for strength, let us remember that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. Thank you for watching. For more stories that strip away the masks of privilege and reveal the unshakable power of truth, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel.